I would just like to make a quick note that the focus levels documentation will continue. The source that I pull them from is unavailable at this time. However, I am assured that the data is safe. They're just improving security protocols, and it will be brought back up as soon as they are comfortable doing so. For now, we'll continue with this document. The Gateway Experience, Brain Hemisphere Synchronization in Perspective. An Introduction. In order to describe the Monroe Institute technique for achieving altered states of consciousness, aka the Gateway Experience, involving brain hemisphere synchronization or Hemi-Sync, the most effective way to begin is to briefly profile the basic mechanics which underlay operation of the related methods, such as hypnosis, transcendental meditation, and biofeedback. It is easiest to effectively describe what Gateway is by beginning with a short description of those associated techniques that share some common aspects with the Gateway Experience, but which nevertheless differ. In this, we can develop a frame of reference at the outset which will provide useful concepts to explain and understand Gateway by comparison as we proceed. Hypnosis. According to the theories of psychologist Ronald Stone and the biomedical engineering models of Ishtek Bentov, hypnosis is basically a technique which permits acquisition of direct messages to the sensory motor cortex and pleasure centers and lower cerebral emotional portions and associated pleasure centers of the right side of the human brain following successful disengagement by stimulus screening function of the left hemisphere of the brain. The left hemisphere of the brain is the self-cognitive, verbal, and linear reasoning component of the mind. It fulfills the function of screening incoming stimuli by categorizing, assessing, and assigning meaning prior to allowing passage of the right hemisphere of the mind. The right hemisphere, which functions as the non-critical, holistic, nonverbal, and pattern-oriented component of the brain, appears to accept what the left hemisphere passes to it without question. Consequently, if the left hemisphere can be distracted, either through boredom or through reduction to a sporadic semi-sleep state, external stimuli, to include hypnotic suggestion, are allowed to pass unchallenged into the right hemisphere, where they are accepted and acted upon directly. The result may involve an emotional reaction originating in the lower cerebral region, sensory motor responses requiring involvement of the cortex, and so on. Both the sensory and the motor cortexes of the right cerebral portion of the brain contain a sequence of points known as the homunculus, which corresponds to points of the body. See Exhibit 1 on the next page. Stimulation of the corresponding areas on the cortex causes intermediate responses in the associated portion of the body. Consequently, introducing the suggestion that the left leg is numb, if it reaches the right hemisphere unchallenged and is referred to the appropriate area of the sensory cortex, will result in the electrical reaction being generated that will induce the feeling of numbness. Similarly, the suggestion that the person is experiencing a general feeling of happiness and well-being would be referred to the appropriate pleasure centers located in the lower cerebral portion or in the cortex of the right hemisphere, thereby inducing the suggested feeling of euphoria. Finally, suggestions such as the one that informs the hypnotic subject that he enjoys enhanced concentration or powers of memory would be responded to in the right hemisphere by accessing unused information storage capacity normally held in reserve as a result of the left hemisphere's selection and control processes. This aspect will become significant in the context of the Gateway process when attention is given to examining the way that hypnosis may be used to accelerate progress in the early stages of the Gateway experience. Editorial note: these are the exhibits for this section. I recommend pausing the video here if you wish to get a good look at them. Continuing on. Transcendental meditation, on the other hand, transcendental meditation works in a distinctly different fashion. In this technique, intense and protracted single-minded concentration on the process of drawing energy up the spinal cord ultimately results in what appears to be creation of acoustical standing waves in the cerebral ventricles, which are then conducted to the gray matter in the cerebral cortex on the right side of the brain. As a result, according to Bentov, these waves will stimulate and eventually polarize the cortex in such a way that it will tend to conduct a signal along the homunculus, starting from the toes and on up. The Bentov biomedical model, as described in the book by Lee Sanella, MD, entitled Kundalini Psychosis or Transcendence, states that the standing acoustical waves are the result of an altered rhythm of heart sounds which are occasioned by prolonged practices of the meditation, and which set up sympathetic vibrations within the walls of the fluid-filled cavities which comprise the third and lateral ventricles of the brain. In addition, according to Bentov, the states of bliss described by those whose Kundalini symptoms have completed a full loop along the hemispheres may be explained by a self-stimulation of the pleasure centers in the brain caused by the circulation of a current along the sensory cortex. Bentov also notes that the most described symptoms start in the left side of the body, meaning that it is mostly a development occurring in the right hemisphere. Although normally a period of meditation involving intense concentration and practice for 5 years or some is required to bring up the Kundalini, Bentov states that exposure to mechanical or acoustic vibrations in the range of 4 to 7 Hz, which is cycles per second, for a protracted period may achieve the same effect. Bentov cites an example: repeated riding in a car whose suspension and seat combination produced that range of vibrations, or being exposed for long periods of time to these frequencies caused by, for instance, an air conditioner duct. He also notes that cumulative effect of these vibrations may be able to trigger a spontaneous psycho-kundalini sequence in the susceptible people who have a particularly sensitive nervous system. Biofeedback. The third consciousness-altering methodology, which we will briefly describe, is biofeedback. Biofeedback is somewhat unique in that it actually employs the self-cognitive powers of the left hemisphere to gain access to such areas of the right brain as the lower cerebral, motor, and sensory corticals and the associated pain or pleasure centers. Instead of suppressing the left hemisphere, as is done in hypnosis, or largely bypassing and ignoring it, as is done in transcendental meditation, biofeedback teaches the left hemisphere first to visualize, then the desired result, and to recognize the feelings associated with that experience of successful right hemisphere access to the specific lower cerebral cortex pain or pleasure or other areas in the manner needed to produce the desired result. Special self-monitoring devices such as digital thermometers are used to inform the left brain when it succeeds in keying into the right hemisphere into accessing the appropriate area. Once this is done, the left brain can then repeatedly instruct the right brain to re-establish the pathways involved so as to produce the same external objective measurements of success. In this way, the pathways are strengthened and emphasized to such an extent that the left brain consciousness is able to access appropriate areas in the right brain using consciousness demand mode. For example, if the subject wishes to increase the circulation in the left leg in order to speed up healing, he may concentrate with his left brain on achieving that result while carefully monitoring with a digital thermometer connected to the left leg. When the concentrated effort begins to achieve success, the digital thermometer will register an increase in temperature in the left leg. At that point, the subject can mentally, left-brainedly, associate the sensations experienced with the result achieved and begin to emphasize, by memory recall, the same process to cause its strengthening by affirmation and repetition. In this way, pain can be blocked, healing can be enhanced, malignant tumors can apparently and supposedly be ultimately destroyed, the body's pleasure centers can be stimulated, and a variety of specific physiological results may be achieved. In addition, biofeedback may be used to greatly accelerate achievement of deep meditation states, particularly for beginners who have not experience in meditative techniques. and whose progress in the methodology is enhanced through effective visualization and external objective affirmation. Display of the subject's brainwave pattern on a cathode ray tube has proven to be a laboratory-validated means by which subjects may quickly learn to place themselves in profoundly relaxed states characterized by the sort of quietude and singularity of mental focus associated with advanced meditation. Now that we have briefly profiled the basic mechanics of the principal techniques for altering or expanding consciousness which share some of the objectives and/or methods employed by the Gateway experience, we may proceed to focus on what the technique actually involves. Fundamentally, the Gateway experience is a training system designed to bring enhanced strength, focus, and coherence to the amplitude and frequency of brainwave output between the left and right hemispheres, so as to alter consciousness, moving it outside of the physical sphere, so as to ultimately escape the restrictions of time and space. The participant then gains access to the various levels of intuitive knowledge which the universe offers. What differentiates the Gateway experience from forms of meditation is its use of Hemi-Sync technique, which it defined as a monograph by Monroe Institute trainer Melis Jaeger as a state of consciousness defined when the EEG patterns of both hemispheres are simultaneously equal in amplitude and frequency. Although Hemi-Sync seems to be rather rare and only a short duration in ordinary human consciousness, Melissa Jaeger states that audio techniques developed by Bob Monroe can induce a sustained audio hemi-sync with the Institute's basic Focus 3 tapes. She notes that studies conducted by Elmer and Alice Green at the Menninger Foundation have shown that a subject with 20 years of training in Zen meditation could consistently establish hemi-sync at will, sustaining it for over 15 minutes. Dr. Stuart Twemlove, a psychiatrist and research associate of the Monroe Institute, reports that, in our studies of the effect of the Monroe tape system on brainwaves, we found that the tapes encourage the focusing of brain energy, it can be measured as with a light bulb, in watts, into a narrower and narrower frequency band. This focusing of energy is not unlike yoga concept of one-pointedness, which we may translate in a Western term as single-mindedness. Dr. Twemlow goes on to observe that as the individual gets into the tapes beyond Focus 3, there's a gradual increase in brainwave size, which is measured of the brain's energy or power.